Alright, so this was a game Kayla and I played in the office. She started with the Byrd opening, so I'm playing black, she's playing white. We kind of went mirrored for the first couple moves, and then kind of developed off into a standard motif. Obviously here she attacks the f-pawn, so my main goal was to just fianchetto the bishop on b7, but obviously you need to do something about this pawn so you can play either of these two moves, and theoretically this move is slightly better according to the engine than g6, so I didn't know that, I just knew this was slightly better. But this is an interesting move. It does give me a slight advantage, and it's not that I'm winning on the spot or anything, it's just one of the downsides of this move is that it gets easier for me to put my pieces over on g4 and kind of anchor them in, because you'll never be able to play h3 and kind of kick the piece away. But I would also just never have guessed that that's the best move to play at knight a6, so what do I know? Game goes on. Obviously my kind of dream situation is basically if I can get this knight here and this knight here, I'm feeling really good because I'm just kind of locking things down a little bit. Game goes on. I decide to move the piece over. Obviously, you have the option of doing this too. I wasn't super impressed by that because I was just like, well, I guess you can kind of just play h6 and push the knight back. But as far as what the engine says, you play this move, and if I play h6, I'm trying to figure out what the downside is. Oh, right, the pawn's here. Okay, so you can't do that in the first move. You have to play something like this first. And it says queen f6 is the best. I'm having a hard time believing queen f6 is the best. I guess you can play this and then just move back. So there's no discovered attack that you have to really worry about, because at the end of the day you can just take this piece. But this almost seems a little dangerous because I'm getting just double forked, for instance. So I have to play a move like here. Takes. Technically we're equal, but I think I'd rather almost have white. I just feel like there's plenty of juice here. Trade some pieces off, and I'm feeling almost a little better, but I guess this is a pretty annoying piece, so that's a little more complicated than I thought. Anyways, rook h3 was what was played, so goes on. I get my kind of ideal knights, not winning necessarily or anything. The game's sort of equal-ish. White's, if anything, just a slight bit better. This move obviously attacks the e-pawn, so I have a choice. Do I want to defend the pawn this way, or even do I want to play a move like moving the bishop back to c1? But apparently queen d7 is the best move by a small margin. I played d5 instead just to get the tempo move, and then if I wanted to move my bishop here, I could. It's not even the best move. And the reason why this move is good is because you're just discouraging either of these pieces moving to b5. Now I made a huge blunder here just to move. This move obviously threatens to take this, and you're almost at the point where you could theoretically take. So let me just make a random move like here. You're almost at the point where you can do this, but obviously not quite. But it is pretty close to being one. This is a huge advantage for me, but obviously there's some possibility. The best move here is knight h6 just to move back, because if you leave it there, obviously there's this sort of possibility which wins the piece back, but obviously that wasn't actually what happened, so I wasn't super worried. Right here I'm supposed to play e7 now that I played this bishop move, and the reason why is because it's just very dangerous to line the pieces up on this diagonal, and I actually fell blunder to that, but Kayla didn't see it. Is that I played, after this move, I played unfortunately c5 to push the knight away, but I just realized something important. One of the great benefits of this pawn is that it can be cannon fodder to stop bishop b5. Obviously when you have the pawn here, you can't block that, you're just losing tons of material. And so when you leave the pawn here, for instance, let's make a random move. If you maybe move like this, you can obviously block a million different ways and everything's totally fine. You're not getting your queen skewered. Obviously I missed that, but thankfully Kayla did too, so the game went on. She instead moved the wrong piece there. She moved the knight there instead, which of course attacks the bishop, and so I have to decide, well, do I care about keeping the bishop, or do I give her a tempo by moving the bishop back? Best move is actually bishop e7, stay on this diagonal, because this is maybe a little bit more of a limiting diagonal, but I kind of felt like I wanted my piece to come back here anyway, but my piece can come back here if I move to e7, so that was just a poor choice on my part. moves the knight out of the way. That way she has the option of moving her knight to either of these two squares once the piece is pushed forward. Because in this position, let's just say she makes a random move queen here. Once I move this piece forward, you only have the move a3, which you might want to play. Kind of just have your little lobster pincers on b5. But if you move this knight out of the way like Kayla did, in the resulting situation that I pushed the pawn, which I did, you at least have the option of which square you kind of want to go to. She ended up still choosing a3, but at least she had the option, and her knight maybe makes more sense going over here than it does staying right there. And then this was kind of an intentional error on my part. First of all, I realized, well, I didn't realize during the game, neither of us realized, of course, that my queen was defending g7. So I thought I was being sneaky and doing a intentional pawn sacrifice. And so when she played bishop takes g7, I was like, sweet, it's good. And then both of us were like, wait, the queen attacks. So I decided not to go after the bishop just because neither of us spotted it. And I instead just played the whole idea of the move anyway, forgetting about the queen. So if the queen was right here, my whole plan was just to play rook g8 anyway. But moves back, and this is a small error because I get to basically maintain a double threat. So what you need to do is just say, well, screw it, I'll take this first, and if you take back, then I can move back. But by moving here, you allow me to exchange off one of my knights, and then if you don't take again, it really wants you to do the in-between take here because I'm threatening two things, right? I'm threatening this pawn, and I'm threatening this piece. But if you do it too early, if you go after this piece a little early, you might mess things up because the slightly... Oh, interesting. Never mind. Rook d2 is better. I was thinking that bishop takes e5 is a lot better because now I have the double threat, and I'm threatening the g2 pawn, and I'm threatening the rook. So I thought this was better, but they're both about the same, apparently. And so she decides to push the piece forward, which I'm actually supposed to play knight takes g3 here and not go after the rook. Going after the rook is actually a apparently significantly less good move because I'm kind of removing pieces, cutting down on the attack, slowing the game down. Takes, I castle. Now this is a part you have to be really, really careful for. I'm only up +2 points, and this pawn is sufficiently defended for the time being, but it's giving me almost a -4 evaluation in my favor, which seems a lot better than it should be. And this kind of increases it by playing this move because what you need to do is just take the knight and not play this and be careful about it. But I thought after d takes c4, I don't understand how this position is -7 in black's favor. Because I was just thinking, well, you take this, and then you're going to pick up the pawn. That doesn't seem that bad. It's still only +2 for me, and then you're threatening this. What I realized here is that in this long tactical melee, starting in this move, obviously the pawn is attacking the bishop, so you have to be careful. But you can't just play a move like this because the bishop's also attacked. So I'm like, well, what's the big deal? You can just take this, and then regardless of whichever way you take back, you'll be totally okay. But I've, of course, forgotten about the in-between move. Queen takes d2 check, and then you start with this check, and then no matter which way the king goes, obviously, then you can pick up bishop over here, and this is obviously, it even says the best move here is f takes d4, because then you get the rooks into the game faster. Obviously, this is super dangerous, but I completely missed the in-between move at first, and so once I saw it, what Kayla was still thinking, I was like, well, I'm not going to play that, because that just kind of ends the game on the spot. And so take with the f-pawn, I still get my attack, and it's not immediately obvious what to do about this. The best move here is knight takes c4, which is what she did, which defends here, and you can't kick the knight away and do this and then attack. And the reason you can't do that is because if you do something silly like this, you're going to get knight forked here, and then the knight attacks the king and the queen, and then you're going to basically, white's theoretically going to be winning again. So how this might look is I move here, here, here. I can take either way, and then basically, if you count the material, basically, obviously, white's ahead just a full rook, and so things are looking pretty good. So where are we? Bishop takes, then takes, and I move over here. I'm allowing the queen check, which means I have to move here. I just thought, let me get my king out of the way because I'm still threatening this, and then once my king's over here, then I'll be able to do this complicated series without having to worry about the consequences as much. Queen check, I move up to a7. Obviously, I can't move to either of these two squares because, again, I'll fall to the same to the same knight fork. So that's the reason why you have to play a7, moves a pawn up, and obviously the whole point of this exchange, or this whole sequence, is just once I take the knight, then I'll be able to take the d-pawn. Engine actually suggests just sacrificing the knight here to delay the inevitable, but that obviously is against the spirit of it. I check, move over here, that's the best move. Either of these two squares, though, they fall victim to rook check, and then once that gets pushed away, the best move here is just to sacrifice the queen, which kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it's just like, well, you want to avoid checkmate. And obviously, if you move away to either of these squares, I'm obviously just going to swoop in and take the knight. So let's just make a sample move. You don't want to move here necessarily, because then I'll check you in the back rank. But if you move, well, I guess I check you in the back rank either way. If you move here or here, I swoop in first with a check right here. And so if you move up here, I check. You obviously can't move back to these squares because the rook's covering all these, so you have to choose one of these two. And then that's where it gets pretty dicey, because no matter where you go, if it's king g2, I'll swoop in with queen takes e2 check. And if you move up here, it's checkmate like that. Just all your squares are just cut off. And obviously, if you move down here, then this will be checkmate instead. So getting pretty tough. Instead of that, what she did is she moved the rook over, which then allows me to take here. And then you're forced to move back to one of these two squares. And whichever way you go, it gets pretty bad. The longest way to extend the game, technically speaking, is king g1, but not by much. And she played king g2, so you just take here, and then whichever one of these squares you go to, you then get checkmated. Did that wrong? Checkmated right here. And if you don't do that, if you instead go queen g1 or king g1 instead, just play the move, king g1, then you do. You can't immediately go for check here, because then you move up. And then after all of this, it's like a really long checkmate. There's a faster checkmate there, but that's why this lasts a little longer. And so that's how the game ended. Good game. Kind of went crazy all of a sudden. There was a chance Kayla had to get my queen, but neither of us saw it. And the game ended in just a feast of rooks.